and welcome to the Peacedale Museum of Art and Culture. I'm Lisa Fiore, President of the Museum Board, and I am delighted to be here tonight with our fellow museum members and two incredible speakers. The dynamic duo consists of Dr. Charlotte Carrington Farmer from Roger Williams University and John McNiff, aka Roger Williams, from Roger Williams National Memorial in Providence. Tonight's program will focus on the first 27 years of Roger Williams' life in England. And we've all been waiting patiently for this presentation because we had to postpone it once, and I give you a lot of credit for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful night, but it's a winter night. So let's give a warm welcome to Charlotte and John.
Say actually thank you for being patient. I had a very bad horse riding accident in the summer, and I've actually had to have 3 separate surgeries on my elbow. So thank you for being patient. My elbow is good. It looks like I've got a big shark bite on my elbow, but aside from that, it's good. So thank you so much for being patient and letting us reschedule. So John's going to start us off with a little bit about how this trip came to be.
Charlotte has said many times, and I agree with her 100%, the best ideas come sitting around in a pub. 2016?
Yeah.
2016, we both had a brilliant idea separate from each other, and I made a phone call. She said, yes, let's sit down and talk about it. I had seen a fellow on Facebook. He's called he calls it something Pilgrim. And he goes around in various places in England, in period costume, trekking, say, taking the Pilgrim's Trek from Canterbury, going different places. And he's going around and seeing all in the footsteps of the original travelers. And I said, there's something here. There's something that we can do with this. Wouldn't it be great if we could walk around in Roger's footsteps? Now, Charlotte had a new thing going on at the university at the exact same time. Had pretty much the same idea come to her. So we sit down in the pub, and it's like, you did, I did, you did, I did.
I've got an idea for you. No, I've got an idea for you.
At the same time it came out,
yeah.
And we said, okay, now how do we do this? It's a matter of literally taking first-year students and putting them on the ground in England where Roger Williams was. The places where he was born, the places where he went to school, the places where he was educated. Going around in London, the sites that are still there, that you can still see and experience. Going to places where dramatic events in history happened during his lifetime that shaped the world. And standing there, not standing back in Rhode Island talking about something over in England, but standing where these things happened. One of the brilliant ones was right outside the Banqueting House. Banqueting House is a nice, big, beautiful, beautiful building.
I have a picture. Do you want me to pull it up?
Sure.
Okay, I have a picture. Oh, carry on.
The Banqueting House. It was the place where the king held parties for everyone. Okay?
Let's go in. Here you are.
Banqueting House. Charles I, on January 30th, 1649, was executed right out in front of the Banqueting House. So we have these students from the United States standing across the street about where this crowd is here. And we go through the story about what happened. That there were people there standing there seeing their king, who for many of them is God's agent on earth. And they're standing there, and I go through the narration of what happened. Because it was a very cold day, the king wore 2 shirts, so he wouldn't be seen shivering, appearing to be scared at what was coming down. And he walks up onto the platform, he hands off his jewels, his cloak, he talks to the executioner and gives him his money, talks about he's going from a corruptible kingdom to an incorruptible kingdom. And he tells the executioner, wait for my signal. And he kneels down, puts his head on the block, says a few small, quiet prayers, and then lifts his arms out. That's the scene. And the axe came down, and you would think after almost a decade of civil war, people dying, these people's families being slaughtered by one side or the other, you would have thought there would have been some sort of a cheer that went up from this crowd. But all the records indicate that the only thing that they heard was a gasp. And these students are standing right here, right across the street from the banqueting house. That's the kind of experience we wanted them to have, not just here, but at the Tower of London, on Cow Lane, where Roger was born, going to Charterhouse, going to all of these places, going to the church where Roger was married, all of these places in England, going to Cambridge, where he went to school, walking the same streets he did. So that's what we wanted to do. Roger Williams University is really big on experiential education. Having an experience, because you know, if you read something in a book, you'll get to the point a year, 2 years from now, you remember part of it, you don't really remember the names, or the dates get fuzzy. Now imagine going to where those stories happened, touching the stones, turning around from that position at the banqueting house and seeing the clock with a black mark at 2 o'clock when the execution took place. Going inside the banqueting house and seeing the way the ceilings are. Knowing that the king walking through there and stepping out one of those windows onto the platform would have looked up just once and seen the same thing. You can't read that. You can't have a lecture give that to you. There's nothing like actually being there.
So, as John said, this came around for me at the perfect time. In 2016, Roger Williams University committed that all incoming freshmen in their first semester of college would take a Roger seminar. So that was perfect for me. I'm the early American historian on campus, and I have been thinking about Roger Williams for most of my adult life. I wrote my undergraduate senior thesis on him and Thomas Morton, who is one of my wanderers from the 17th century, way back in 2002, 2003, as I was an undergraduate in England. So Roger has been on my mind for many years. And when I took the job at Roger Williams University in 2012, I was horrified that the students didn't really know anything about Roger Williams. And so it kind of coincided with us getting a new amazing dean for general education, Jason Jacobs, who really had a similar vision. And so that first year when every incoming freshman took a seminar on Roger Williams was the spring break in 2017. John and I took this trip. And so it was life-changing, both for myself, for yourself, and for the students. And so we'd like to talk to you a little bit tonight about some of the cool things that we did. So I'm going to just kind of click back. So we have an amazing video that what we'll do is we'll send out to the folks who organised the talk. And we haven't quite got enough internet to be able to show it to you on YouTube, but this shows a nice 5-minute video highlight of John and I in action in the first year. So one of the things that was really interesting that John was saying is that we could share this with you all night, right? We could think about the fact that we know Roger was born in London around the year 1603. And one of the really interesting things for me is the story behind why we don't know the year, right? The fact that in 1666 the Great Fire of London swept through and destroyed part of St Sepulchre that would have housed any records pertaining to this. So it was really exciting for me to think about some of those problems and to think about his mum and dad and the fact that his father was a merchant tailor, and think about the importance of Smithfield, but take the students to these places. So the first place that we started off is in London, and we were really interested in a couple of things while we're in London. You know, what was Roger's church like? Where did he go to high school? What are the places he would have seen, such as the Inns of Court? So I'll share a few pictures of some of the places that we went to. So one of the cool things that we've been able to do is use maps of the period to bring this to life. So one of the things I like to do is just orientate everyone with where Roger grew up. So hands up, who's been to London? Great.
Wow.
Oh, amazing. Wow, this is the right audience for this. So I want you to see where we are then. We're north of the River Thames that runs here. And you can see on here then that the Tower of London is down here. And this is just a wonderful screenshot from Google Maps. And you can see it says St Sepulchre. And on Google Maps it says musical church with Pocahontas link. And that was one of the funniest stories I've heard when we were at St Sepulchre. You know, I said to them, why does it say this on Google Maps? And they were telling us that John Smith of Pocahontas fame is buried somewhere like in or around the church, but when the Great Fire kind of swept through in 1666, they lost track of where everyone was buried, and they've got this wooden sign. This is an inside secret, but they just randomly move around just for fun, just to, you know, because they have no idea where he is. So the first time we went, it was in like the back corner here, and then the second time it was somewhere completely different. So that was really interesting to me to actually, for the church, they were actually have no idea where he's at. So I want to think kind of geographically where we are then. So we're north of the River Thames, and we're going to look at a little bit at St Sepulchre, which was Roger's Church of England church when he was a young boy. So again, like I'm just orientating you here, you can see the River Thames is down here, and I want you to pay attention to the fact that St Paul's Cathedral is here, and St Sepulchre is kind of up and to the left of what we're looking at. I'm going to, in a second, switch to a 17th century map. So this is the type of stuff that we were doing when we were thinking about where we were. So I want you to have a look then about of where we are. So St Sepulchre is down here. Pay attention to a couple of things on this map when I switch to the 17th century one. I want to have a look at the fact that the street north of St Sepulchre is Cock Lane, and then there's Hosier Lane, and then there's this big round Smithfield, right? Like that's what I want you to kind of keep an eye on.
One more thing, Smithfield Street.
Yeah.
Smithfield Street, West Smithfield Street. See this arc? They're straightened out, but note the arc.
Okay, so I'm going to switch to the 17th century map. So you should know where we are, right? The River Thames is down here. This is St Paul's Cathedral, the big purple one. And then if you remember from the Google map, St Sepulchre is up and to the left, and so this is St Sepulchre. So this is one of the things that we're able to do with the students, that we studied 17th century maps and letters really in depth before we went, and then when we went there, we were able to bring it to life. And so, if you remember from the clips up, St Sepulchre is down here. Remember Cock Lane, still called Cock Lane. Remember Hosier Lane, right? That's still called Hosier Lane when Roger was growing up. Beautiful 17th century non-standardization of spelling. Look at the lovely long S here. And do you remember the kind of round circle of Smithfield, right? So this is Smithfield that you can see again, lovely 17th century spelling.
And here's that arc. Cowley, where Roger was born.
So it was very exciting for us to be able to go and see some of these places. One of the most exciting places, I think, for me was going to Charterhouse. So you can see that this is the Sepulchre Church. Here's Cowley, where Roger grew up. Here's Smithfield, and then here is Roger's high school, Charterhouse, as he would have known it. This map is Roger's 17th century London. And I want to think carefully a little bit about Smithfield then, because one of the things that strikes me is that it is really important, the particular neighbourhood that he grows up in. So if you remember the map that we just showed you, it looks like it's a marketplace, right? You can see people there by the hustle and bustle, and it is a marketplace in the 17th century, and it continues to be a big marketplace now. So it was interesting for the students to see that Smithfield used to be a marketplace and is still a marketplace. But there's a separate history to Smithfield that I think really resonates with Roger Williams as a young boy. So this is from Thomas Fuller's Church History of Britain, published in the middle of the 17th century, and he's writing about Legate, who was burnt alive at Smithfield. So it says, to Smithfield, right on Roger's neighbourhood, he was brought to be burnt. See here, it is neither the pain nor the place, but only the cause makes a martyr. In this very Smithfield, right, Roger's neighbourhood, how many saints in the Marian days suffered for the testimony of Jesus Christ? So how many people were put to death here under Queen Mary, right? As she was known as Bloody Mary, she turned the country back to being Catholic and killed the Protestants. Whereas now, one there died in his own blood for denying it. So he's saying that basically in the mid-17th century, they're killing Protestants for the same issue that they were doing under the Marian days, right? It makes no sense to them. And it's as vast was the conflux of people about him. Never did a scarce fire at midnight summon more hands to quench it than this at this noonday did eyes behold it. So loads of people came there. He was burned to the ashes. And so this is the area that Roger grew up in, right? He would have known this long, bloody history of persecution for the sake of religion. Now, one of the things that we can think about is this moment. So this is when John Lambert was put to death. Can you see he's being burnt alive? There's an amazing / terrifying documentary in England called Jamie's Dream School, where they basically send eminent scholars within any field, within history or science or mathematics, into a high school in England with students who are very disillusioned with the education system, and they send these professors in to try to inspire them. They sent in Professor Starkey, who is an eminent public historian, to get students excited about the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And one of the things they did was recreate a 17th century burning. Everyone's like, what? They didn't burn anyone alive, I know, but they got a dummy and they put it in bacon fat and they talked through the process about how it wasn't they just kind of threw fire on them. Do you want to speak to this, John?
Yeah, one of the things, they have a mannequin tied to a post, and wood is piled up around its feet. They have some pork inside the mannequin so that the smell will come out. So, an experience of seeing someone burned at the stake is not just looking and seeing, but there's also at least one more sense in smelling what's going on. And he starts the fire, and he explains that this amount of wood is not going to last very long. This amount of wood will last maybe 15, 20 minutes, and that's not enough to kill. So as this person is being burned, the fire starting at his feet and working its way up his body, then it starts to die down, and he pleads out to the crowd, more wood, give us more wood. The guy that's being burned at the stake, because he knows there's no out. So he cries for more wood, and this took over an hour and a half until he was finally silenced. They had the kids taking a look, and one of them, brilliant kid, reaches in and tries to move one of the locks and gets burned. Experiential learning. But they comment on the smell. They comment on the sight of it. And finally, the flames get up near the head. And he goes through a first-hand account of what it was like for this person to be burned at the stake. Taking over an hour and a half of throwing more wood on, until finally, his lips were finally moving, and then they finally stopped. An hour and a half. Not 10, 15 minutes, not 5 minutes the way they show in movies. An hour and a half. There are illustrations, and I don't think you have any of them there, where the person is burned to the bone up to the knees. This is a horrible way to die. And it wasn't a requirement, but this is a public execution in the middle of a marketplace. You're expected to be there. It's an example of what happens when people don't obey the rules. And Roger sees this not more than a football field away from where he grows up. And that previous passage about how it doesn't make any sense that this is the same thing that was happening to a different denomination just a few years ago. That starts ringing in Roger's ears, and his nose, and everything else. It's right there in front of you. Your eyes are tearing from the smoke. And if you've ever smelled pork fat being burned, rendering fat, it's a smell that will gag you.
So we were able to go and visit St Sepulchre, which was Roger's parish church growing up. So St Sepulchre is a really interesting church, in addition to having John Smith buried somewhere in the ground, because of how close it is to Smithfield, to the execution site, but also to Newgate Prison. So one of the really... Oh yeah, go ahead, that was super good, yeah. It's just on. Literally that one, yeah. Right. Oh yeah, perfect, here we are. So here we are inside. Look at this is the most recent trip. We've done this trip twice, first in 2017, and then again this past spring break. So here we are, wonderful group of students. So one of the things inside there is the execution bell. If you can go on one more. This here. And so I was asking, I didn't know about this. I knew that the church, Rogers Parish Church, was the closest church to Newgate Prison. I knew it was the closest church to the execution site at Smithfield, but I didn't know the story of this bell. Can you remember the bell story?
I don't know the full, well, the bell would be rung when someone from Newgate is going to be brought to Smithfield to be executed. That concept of do not ask for whom the bell tolls. This is the bell.
Yeah.
Okay, and there is a passageway directly underneath the stained glass window. You can just barely see an arch here. There's a passageway that went from the church where the bell was kept, and the person would be ringing the bell so someone knows that it's coming, and walks through the passageway into Newgate Prison, hearing the bell tolling. Knowing one of them, at least, knows that it's their time to go.
So what I remember from the bell, you can see the date down here, is that one of the parishioners who was a member of the St Sepulchre Church donated money in 1605, so a couple of years after Roger's probably born, to have a special execution bell. So Roger would have gone into this church and seen this bell, knowing full well that this is the bell that's going to toll when he's a young kid, if anyone's going to come and be executed just down the street. And I felt like, for me, that made a lot of sense, right? We don't, as historians, have the written document where Roger sits down and says, oh my goodness, growing up in Smithfield, knowing that long and bloody history and seeing the bell and smelling the burnings, that's a reason why I wanted religious freedom, or that's a reason why I felt that church and state should be separate. But we as historians can, think about the physicality, right? Looking at the maps, looking at what's left inside the church, and trying to use these non-written sources to make suggestions. So I'm going on sabbatical next semester, and part of my time is going to be in Cambridge, looking at not so much the London life, but Roger's time at Cambridge, and why does he go to this particular college? To what extent does he become radicalized as a separatist Puritan during that time? And I feel like so much of that English time of Roger's life is not as well known as the stuff that he's really famous for, right? So I think there's more work to be done, and this bell was one of the things that really hammered that home to me.
And the other thing to really remember is distance. Like I said, from where Roger was born on Cow Lane to Smithfield is about 100 yards. Even if he stayed at home, he would have smelled it. But that kind of activity, it's a public activity. Where are we at?
So it is cool.
It's
so
a
I
cool.
wondered if we could think about how Roger's life changes when he meets one of the most important people in England at the time. So I'll start the story, but I feel like you tell it better than me. The story goes that Roger, as a young man, young teenage boy, we're not sure how
A little bit younger, I think, probably. But young.
As a young man, is sat in Sepulchre where we just were, taking notes on the sermon, and he was taking notes in shorthand, and he caught the eye of the Chief Justice of England, Sir Edward Coke, who I think, honestly, had Roger not had that connection, I don't know if he'd be here. I think he has this transformational effect on him, and John Barry's book explores this to some extent, but I think there's a little bit more to be done. And one of the doors that Edward Coke opens for Roger is when he takes him, so Edward Coke is obviously involved in the English legal system, he spends a lot of time at the Inns of Court, but he also takes Roger as his young scribe, his amanuensis, to go and take notes in shorthand in all really important situations. You want to pick up the story?
Sure. Sir Edward Coke, you probably know something that he said, even if you don't know it. A man's home is his castle. That's Coke. Okay. Sir Edward Coke wasn't just Chief Justice of England. He's one of the very first people to start codifying English law, going back to the Magna Carta, setting precedent in legal code all the way back that far. It's often said that the law was Sir Edward Coke's sword. He was a prosecutor under Elizabeth, prosecutor for the Drake, and under James, the prosecutor for the traitors on Gunpowder Night, or the Guy Fawkes trial. Okay? This is a man that's in the middle of everything. And Rogers discovered writing in shorthand in the church at St. Sepulchre. And the story goes that he was taken out to be disciplined because he's just scribbling in a book. The church warden grabs him and drags him back outside. And before he can be punished, Coke stops him and says, "What are you doing?" And Roger explains that he's taking down the sermon. And the wardens look at it and it looks like just scribbles on page. And Coke tests him. He says, "Okay, read it back." And Roger reads it back word for word. They don't have tape recorders. Shorthand is one of the few ways you can take down, as fast as people are speaking, what people are saying. Coke sees the tremendous value that this young boy is, both to him and to England. Takes him under his wing and sends him to school. But he also takes him to Parliament. He also takes him to court. This is a time when everybody is spying on each other. Everybody is spying on each other, trying to get some dirt just in case you need it. Now, aside from Roger taking down speeches in Parliament, or going to court and taking down royal proclamations, I have no doubt that Roger is taking down conversations in the corridors. Standing there, a little boy, taking down these notes and bringing them back to Sir Edward. And another thing to think about this, as Roger's growing up, unlike a lot of the other Puritans that are farm boys or living out in the country, Roger is not just growing up in London. He's growing up at court. And unless he looked the part, he wouldn't have been acceptable at all. So Roger's used to nice things. He's taken under the wing of the Chief Justice of England and sent to this beautiful school. He's used to nice places. And that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to just go through, here we are, so we just saw the 17th century map of Inns of Court, so we're able to use that. Oh, yeah, here we are. This is us right at Inns of Court, certainly somewhere Roger would spend time with Sir Edward Coke. Do you want to go on again? Keep going, we've seen these. There's a several piece we can skip through. Here's Whitehall, the Banqueting House. About this, so we can keep going. Okay, so here are some of the other places. We'll come back to this. Can you just go one more time? Here we are. So here's what we're talking about. So the importance of Sir Edward Coke. So I think there's something else that always strikes me about Sir Edward Coke is that he is willing to challenge the highest authority in the land and potentially pay that ultimate price. So he is the one who challenges the King of England, right? The guy who on earth is the first person, here below God, and he's willing to challenge the king because he thinks he's right, he's got the law on his side, and he pays the price. He's thrown in the Tower of London, again, one of the other places. And again, I don't think we have that many written sources where Roger says, well, I saw that example that Edward Coke set where he paid the price for his ultimate beliefs. But I can't help but wonder that growing up with Sir Edward Coke as a mentor, watching him challenge the King of England because he thinks he's right, is exactly what he does when he's kicked out of Massachusetts Bay, right? He could have stayed there quietly and held his beliefs, but he's willing to challenge the highest authorities, right? The court and the government in the Bay Colony, and pay that ultimate price, just like his mentor when he was a kid. So again, I think spending time in England and thinking really carefully about this English context helps us understand some of those decisions that Roger makes later on in his life.
There's a couple of things. There are parallels in between Roger and Sir Edward in small ways, and there are words that echo in both of them. There's Sir Edward Coke, that thing that a man's home is his castle. Well, Roger takes that one step further. A man's soul is his own. And as it's been said about Sir Edward, that the law was his sword. Roger often repeats that the scripture is his sword. So there are parallels in the way that they're expressing themselves about things that are too close to be coincidence.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think I've got some pictures of Charterhouse coming up. Do you want to just go on one? Here we are, yeah. So this is Rogers High School. So I want you to think about your high school experience and whether it looked anything like this. So it's always exciting for me to see the fact that there is a plaque to Roger Williams in his old high school. It says, in memory of Roger Williams, formerly a scholar of Charterhouse. So he's actually reasonably well known within the Charterhouse community. But when we've been there both times, they're always really excited to have Rhode Islanders, token Rhode Islander, me, here, and they are really proud of Roger as an alum. Quite a bit of Charterhouse hasn't changed from when Roger was there. You can see some of the exterior here, and if you click on again, you'll see some of the interior. So you can see two things here. You can see this is the chapel, and this would have been very similar to what Roger would have seen. Am I remembering right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then this is the dining hall. Again, a big piece of which was contemporary to Roger's time. And Charterhouse then had only very recently become a high school. It had this really interesting, like 100 years experience right before. Do you want to?
Well, it had been Carthusian monastery that was founded in the 1400s, I think,
Yeah.
and dissolved under Henry VIII. Then you have this large piece of property that was changing hands back and forth for a while until, what's his name? The hospital.
Oh,
Sutton.
Sutton, yeah.
A person by the name of Sutton called it. It became Sutton's Hospital. It became sort of like an old folks' home, but not quite. It was a place for retirees that they could live, and then it became Charterhouse School. There's one of the rooms in Charterhouse that is absolutely beautiful because it is outside the walls of the City of London. That Elizabeth, when she was arriving to be crowned queen, stopped and held court there. It's just outside the wall, so she's not in the city yet. And this beautiful, absolutely gorgeous room with beautiful ceilings and everything else, tapestries on the walls, that's where she first held court, just before she was crowned Queen of England, Elizabeth I.
Yeah, and so this is where Roger went to high school. He would have known this history, this particularly with Queen Elizabeth. And they're the places that he's taking his lessons. These are the places that he goes to chapel daily within school. So if anyone is going to England in the near future, I highly encourage you to take a tour of Charterhouse. In a wonderful twist of fate, it is now a retirement community again. And so we take a tour with the brothers, and this is our favourite, this guy who we know in England. This is Brother Charles, who gives a fabulous tour. So if you're there, I highly recommend taking a tour of Charterhouse.
Can we go back to the first picture of Charterhouse?
Yeah.
There's one before that, I think, that had the lawn out in front.
This is nice.
Go further?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's perfect. I think that's the only one I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Because there's a great lawn, a great small park. And by great, I mean, it's a good-sized park
Yeah, yeah.
out in front of Charterhouse. And this is a mass grave. Plague victims, because it is outside the walls of the city. This was one vast pit that plague victims were thrown into and buried there. They said there was something like 10,000 bodies
Yeah.
in this park. This beautiful landscape, nice little park with the daffodils and the grass and everything else. But that's just outside the gates of Charterhouse. It's a nice little contrast there.
Who was it? Sorry.
Plague victims.
Yeah.
People who died in the plague, about 10,000 of them.
And you see huge outbreaks of the Black Death in the 14th century in 1348, but then it has a huge resurgence in the 17th century to the point where Cambridge University gets shut down for a while because it's just not safe to be there, right? They're really nervous about how quickly the bubonic plague could spread. So again, like thinking about that as a context to illness and understanding Roger's childhood. Do you want to go right there? Yeah, so this is Charterhouse. So after we left London, there were a couple of other places in London that we visited that we'll circle back to. Is there any way you want to talk about in London now before we go to Cambridge? I've got the tower.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, well, what I think we'll do is we'll think about this chronologically. So we'll come back to London and we'll think about some of the other places that Roger would have visited. As he comes back to London, years later after he's been banished, when he's trying to secure that charter, when he takes those 2 trips in the mid-17th century. So Edward Cook also paved the way for Roger to study not only at Charterhouse but also at Cambridge University. One of the things that I'm really interested in is the Cambridge College system, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, but Cambridge, in my experience, is a little bit like Harry Potter's Hogwarts. You go to the university, right, you go to Hogwarts or Cambridge, but you are also affiliated with a college, so like Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, whatever it might be. So Pembroke, Trinity, Clare, Jesus, Magdalen, etc. And so college life really does define your experience. You take classes in your subject, but the college is your home. And it's really interesting to me, why did Roger go to Pembroke, right? In the 17th century, there are 2 universities. There are Harvard and, there's not, that's wrong. There are Cambridge and there is Oxford. And so why Cambridge, not Oxford? I mean, a lot of the Puritans from this, the Great Migration, go to Cambridge rather than Oxford, so that makes sense. But why Pembroke? Why not Trinity College, which is Sir Edward Cook's college? So I don't have the answer to that question. Maybe if you talk to me after I've spent the semester back at Cambridge in the spring, I might have a better answer to that. So why did he choose that college? My feeling is, and we'll show you a slide in a second, I think it might have been money, actually. That's what I wonder if it is. Or it might be making a break from Edward Cook, who's got a bit of a reputation for himself. I think there's a lot we can learn about his college days. So he goes to Pembroke College at Cambridge. This is a little bit later than Roger was there. This is 1690. This part of the college would have been there. This is the later edition. So this is Pembroke as Roger would have known it. Do you want to flip on one more? So we took our little Roger back and we put him right next to the gate that says college members only. That's just a fun picture. Carry on. So the first time we were there, Pembroke opened their archives to us. So this was really exciting, and they've got a whole plethora of stuff. Like, you name it, they've probably got it. Anything connected to Roger Williams, the Pembroke archives at Cambridge have them. So you can see that John's here looking at one of the portraits they have. They have like a little silver spoon that Brown had sent over when they were dedicating their version of Pembroke. And so it was really exciting to go into the archives. Can we go to the next slide? And so here we come, right? So this has inspired a whole piece of my sabbatical next semester. So one of the things that you do when you go to Cambridge, even now, I started at Cambridge, not in the 17th century, but like 10, 15 years ago.
There's the date.
So you matriculate in, and so the recording secretary of the university keeps a book like this. The books are pretty much exactly the same now as they were then.
This book is about that thick.
And so it records the year that you start college, right? It's a matriculation and there's a whole ceremony that goes in with it. And this book is formulaic. You could literally, I think, flip in at any page in this book and it would look exactly like this. So the Pembroke archivist was very excited to share with us Roger's entry. And I've read a lot about Roger's time at Cambridge, but I'd never seen the original version. I'd seen a nice typed out version. So what you'll see here then is every entry is, the date is underlined, and then there's like a short paragraph, right, about the scholar, right? And it says their name, where they're coming from, who might be sponsoring them, etc. Chunks of it are in Latin, so you can see that's it's standard. And then you see here then this entry, right? So from this page you can see that the date is underlined and it's just got a last name and a full stop. And then there's this massive gap of text, and you can see clearly that this is a different hand, right? This is different handwriting that is not necessarily, it is so different to all of the other entries. And so we looked at it like, what? So we just flip on for me. So you can see then here a little bit clearer, this is a nice zoomed in, that this hand and this hand are the same, but this is different, right? Like it's really different. And all we have for Roger is the date that's not underlined. We don't have a first name, we just have Williams and that
Period.
that full stop period. So why? did they just have a busy day in the office and were like, well, we'll come back and fill that in? Was it that they didn't know? Was it that he might have fallen out of favour with Cook? Was it that he just wasn't worthy of that? Like, we don't know, right?
It doesn't make sense. And asking the people, the book, like I said, is this thick. Page after page after page throughout the whole book. This is the only entry that's like this.
So we don't know. So, so I'm going to spend some more time in Pembroke Archives this coming spring. Yeah.
Doesn't it look like something's erased?
That's back, the page on the other side leading through.
Yeah, but good spot. Yeah, you can see
Yeah.
I know, right? So I don't know. If you go in as well, so we saw this matriculation documents at Pembroke. You want to press the thing for me? We also saw the scholarship. Can you see here? Items William Londonis, right? So this talks about, this is always interesting for my students, right, who are always thinking about the cost of college and financial aid. And so we're able to see the scholarship, and if you go on again, you'll see the other document that we saw. We saw to the scholars to be of Thorn, YU, which you pronounce, the City of London, and it tells you within this document that the scholarships that they're going to get. And so Roger is a talented linguist, and again, we spent a lot of time on the River Thames, where we imagine that Roger's dad took him down there as a merchant tailor. And this is your words, I'm just saying your words. You want to say your words? I'll say your words. So Roger's dad, as a merchant tailor, would have likely gone down to the River Thames to try and negotiate to get the best deal on the cloth that is coming in from all over the world. And you can imagine that if you're trying to barter and trade with someone, if you can speak some of their language, you're probably going to get a better deal. And so we think about Roger's gift of languages, right? By this point, he's got Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. He goes on, he speaks Dutch, he has...
Dutch, French, Italian.
Yeah, he's a very talented linguist. And there's an amazing article, actually, that came out not that long ago on Roger as a linguist that I'm happy to share with people.
How many people know what a merchant tailor is? Okay. They don't just make suits and sell them. The merchant tailor makes suits, the bespoke suits in London, the ones that go to the people in court, the aristocrats, the very fanciest of clothes. So to make them, he has to go down to the docks and get the best cloth, silks from Italy, which are coming all the way from the Orient, fine linens, fine cottons, fine wools that are coming from the continent. And if you ever go down to the docks, and there's a boat coming in from Italy, and your competition down there to get those silks speaks English, and you happen to be able to speak Italian, you can shout out to the boat and start making the deals before it's even tied up. Okay? You have this opportunity when you speak Italian, French, Dutch. The boats coming in there, and the city itself, just opens up wide. Because London then, as it is now, was a cosmopolitan city with people from all over the world. There's a cemetery recently found in the northern part of London. Again, 23,000 graves in this one lot. And they did an analysis of where these people were from, because there's records of these people. This wasn't just a mass burial. They're from Africa. They're from France. They're from the Middle East. And this dates from the middle part of the 1500s to the middle part of the 1600s. So the same variety that you see on the streets of London today, you would have seen back in Roger's day 400 years ago. It's always been a cosmopolitan center. Having more than one language opens so many more doors for you.
Yeah, and so you can see here that, just going back to the handbook, so that Roger gets his scholarship because he can make verses in Greek and Latin, and they've got competency in this, the skills. So, I don't know, I think seeing Roger as this young university man, right, it really brings it to life, certainly for my students at the same age, when they tend to think of Roger as this, super wise old man who always knew along that he was going to found this amazing colony and do these great things. But at one time he wasn't, right? He was just a young freshman student who was, trying to get an education and had no idea where he was going. So I think thinking about that, right, the chronology of Roger really is important for my students. Can you just pass one? Thank you. So we then follow Roger to where he gets his first job. So we think about Roger as a young man growing up in London, we think about him as a college student at Cambridge, and then we follow him to what seems nowadays to be the middle of nowhere, right? So we get on a train and then we get a minivan to High Labour in Essex, which is one of the most beautiful places that we go. It's really not changed that much, apart from the big house that Roger would have lived in that does not survive. But the church where he got married still survives. So we go to follow Roger to High Labour in Essex, which is where he got married, where he got his first job out of college. And so this is the time where he gets his job as a chaplain to a wealthy family in High Labour, Essex, which indicates to me that during this time at Cambridge, he's no longer within that Church of England realm, right? So, we're not quite sure when this radicalisation happened, right? I think it's Cambridge.
I think it is. It's going to be Cambridge. Aside from Cambridge being and continuing to be a real radical school, he was dissatisfied with the Church of England when he was in the established church, as they said. When he was in London, he goes to Cambridge, and that gets fed. It's a hotbed for Puritans. This branch of the Church of England that wants to purify the church, get it back to biblical basics, make it more fundamental. And it's a radical way of thinking. This is a brand new way of looking at the church to fix it. And this is going. It's pure. And there are people in Cambridge that are listening to everybody's conversations. Every window has an ear to it to see what people are talking about. Because if you can catch somebody, it raises your status. So there are spies everywhere. So it's a dangerous thing to be a Puritan. But here at High Labour, he's the chaplain. He gets to speak his mind. He's brought into this society place. And these people appear to be good Puritans, if you would, or people that are at least bent towards being Puritan. Now, totally unfounded theory. But Roger, when he was younger, is at court. He's at Parliament. He's under the wings of Sir Edward Coke. He sees the good life that the aristocracy lived. And as he tries to step into it as a growing young man, he's constantly told, no, not for you. You don't have the right position. And getting that time and time again, he gets a little bit disillusioned, but there is another way to get into that aristocracy. It's through the church.
I was going to say marriage.
Well, there's that too, but through the church. The bishops, the cardinals, they're at Parliament. He sees what has happened in England in the history just prior to him, from Henry VIII to Edward to Mary to Elizabeth. With every time the monarch changes, the church changes. And he sees that it's been utilized as a tool. And I think that's part of his radicalization. Get it back to Scripture, get it back to basics, as Sir Edward Coke was doing with the law. Get it back to Scripture and let that be his sword. And that's what he's doing at High Labour.
He also is getting his heart broken at High Labour.
Yes.
So I feel like my job is to think about Roger as a real person, right? And one of the ways I think I can bring that to my students is to think firstly about him as a college student, but then secondly to think about him as a young man in his first job, falling in love with someone and then not being able to be in love with them. So whilst he's in High Labour, he falls in love with Jane Whaley. And what's really cool is that we have some letters from this period, like these are the earliest letters that survive. And so he writes to her aunt, Lady Joan Barrington, professing his undying love to Jane Whaley. And Lady Barrington says, she basically tells him to get lost, that you are not good enough for my niece.
Another whack. Yeah.
Another whack, right? Like, you are not high enough rank. And I think she's just really offended that he would even think that he had a chance. And the letter that he then sends back after that rejection it makes me cringe every time I read it. Like, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the term we would use now is mansplaining, right? Like, he's trying to, it's just cringy. And then the second thing he does is that he keeps going on and on and on and on about how Lady Barrington is old and grey. And like her good days have passed her, and I'm like, why are you doing that? So one of the questions I ask my student is like, why does Roger Williams keep going on about how long in the tooth Lady Barrington is when she's just whacked him down? So he then falls into this depression.
Right, yeah. Weeks and weeks
Yeah.
in bed. Crashed, basically. He's crashed. And they sent one of Lady Barrington's ladies in waiting to go care for him, Mary Bernard. And coming out of that depression, that's the face that he sees.
I then say to my students, to what extent was Mary Barnard a rebound relationship? But I think there is a true connection there, but it's within months of him declaring his undying love to Jane Whaley to then he marries Mary Barnard. So it's a really interesting time. So you go again, yeah?
These letters are a perfect example of how Roger does not pull punches when he's upset. Throughout his history and when he's writing letters, he starts off with this wonderful praise of Lady Barrington, how wise she is, and how she can see that he's a man of capability, and he's got a future. So she above all else should see that he's the one for Jane. And then when he turns her down, says, "Lady, you're getting gray, you're getting old, you're going to be meeting your maker soon." It's just, he doesn't pull punches when he's upset.
Yeah, and so one of the cool things is really the church in High Labour has not really changed at all really from when Roger was there, both the interior and the exterior. If you remember St Sepulchre, his parish church growing up in London, half of that church burned down in the Great Fire of London in 1666. So the tower survived, right, but the rest of the church was destroyed. The exact opposite here, this is another medieval church, and you could see on the interior, this is from our first trip, how plain and simple it is. And so one of the things that one of my students said to me the first time we were there, and it really resonated, is that, this is still Church of England, right? But by this point, Rogers, he's out of the Church of England, he's a Puritan. But if he had to go to a Church of England church, he might be able to live with this because it's not High Church Anglican. If you remember St Sepulchre, even to this day, really ornate, colourful stained glass windows. All Saints High Labour is not like that at all. So it was a more palatable version of the Church of England physically.
And it's all whitewashed inside. Completely white. No murals, no frescoes, just plain whitewash. It's the perfect Puritan church.
It really is. And if you just go on a little bit more, you can see that a lot of the graves from the period, from the Masham family, who Roger was connected to, survive both outside the church and inside the church. Here's John talking inside the church. Then you just go one more. So this is important. So we're stood getting a picture with this here. So I just finished writing a piece on religious tolerance in the 17th century, centering Roger Williams, but one of the people I had to mention was this person, right? John Locke, who when we're thinking about conversations of separation of church and state and religious freedom, everyone comes to Locke. So John Locke is buried in the church where Roger got married to Jane Whaley, and what we're working on right now when we do this trip again, not this coming spring, the spring after, is his Locke's tomb is here, is to have a plaque to Roger on the inside of the church, but right behind where Locke's tomb is, where we think about these two founders who pioneered religious freedom in the 17th century. One of who is perhaps well known for theorising about it, Locke, but Roger who lived it every day, right? He put theory into practice, which makes him so very special. So if you get the chance, do go out to All Saints High Labour. It's a really special place. They have a small newsletter that they've got that talks a little bit about Roger Williams, so there is a little bit of a memory there, and they're super good. This is Tina Litchfield, she's fabulous. Do you want to say anything else about this?
It's just an absolutely magnificent place, and if you, from where we're standing there, if you look out, the countryside hasn't changed from Roger's time. There's a couple of power lines going across, but aside from that, it's open, rolling hills, farmland, trees in the distance. It looks pretty much exactly what Roger would have seen coming out that door when he was married.
And you go again, I'm keeping an eye on the time. So this was one of the coolest things for me is I'm really interested in the written sources that survive, and I knew that Roger had corresponded with Anne Sadler. Anne Sadler is Sir Edward Cook's daughter, and I'd read the transcript, but I hadn't seen the original letters. So because Sir Edward Cook is a Trinity College man at Cambridge, the letters that his daughter writes to Roger Williams when he goes back to England in the mid-17th century, he reconnects with his old friends, and he writes to Anne Sadler about all the stuff that he's gone through, right? Like how he's been banished, and how everyone hates him, how they burnt his book, The Blue Lieutenant. And so the original letters survive in the Wren Library. So we were able to see the original letters in the Wren between Roger and Anne Sadler. And if you go on again, you'll see this. So here we are. You can see this is Roger writing. My much honoured friend, Mrs. Sadler. The never dying honour and respect, right? So this sets the tone. He is over the top nice to her, like super respectful. He's telling her about all the troubles that he's had. They burnt my book. They have banished me out. But I've got no friends in New England. I've got no friends in Old England. I've been through the mill. She then gets this letter, and you can see the hand is different. She in the 17th century paper is scarce, so we don't have an envelope like we do now. We basically fold it and then write on the letter, so paper is scarce. So you can see here then, Roger has written, for my much honoured, kind friend, Mistress Sadler, right? So this is the address. When she's unfolded this letter, this is what she scrawls. This Roger Williams, when he was a youth, would in shorthand take sermons and speeches in the Star Chamber. And then she goes on to talk about how, he'd been a friend to her father. And then she ends it with this, right? If he ever has the face to return to his native country, i.e. England again, Tyburn may give his welcome, like i.e. the gallows at Tyburn would welcome it. So this is what she did. She is not happy to hear from it. And if you go again, so these are some of the letters that survived, and just like when he was writing to Lady Barrington, he does not give up, and he sends her a copy of his book, The Bloody Tenant, and he's like, here's a copy of my book. She's like, I daren't even open it. She writes back, he's like, I daren't even look at it. I saw the front page, for The Bloody Tenant, I daren't even look at it. And he just doesn't get the message, and he writes back, again, really what I read as patronising, but he believes he's right. He says, you wouldn't read my book, but I'll send you a copy of a different book from one of your own, a Church of England man. Maybe you'll read that. And she then writes back, she's like, I thought my first letter would have got the message across. You can see on this letter, she's really pressing on hard. She's not happy. But she says, it seems like you've got a face of brass and you do not blush. You've got no shame. And she says, trouble you back to where you've come from. And so, again, these letters really show that side of Roger that he truly believes is right. Whatever means he can share with people to show that religious freedom is the way forward, he'll go that extra mile. And you can see, if you just actually go back one slide, you can see here then in the notes in the margin that people have scribbled. And if you go forward again, sorry, I know we're jumping all over the place, you can see that they're making notes in the margin. And if you go one more, you can see this is Sadler writing, Mr. Williams, right? My honoured friend Mrs. Sadler, she's like, Mr. Williams. And you can see here that they're talking about Milton, right? So it's super cool to see the physical letters and the annotations that they made in the margin. So again, if you ever have the chance, the folks at the Wren Library at Trinity College are really willing to do this. I also have high-res scans of the letters that if anyone's interested, I'm more than welcome to share them with you. It's 8:01. We could definitely talk more about the London stuff. While we're there, we go to the Globe and see, the first time we saw Othello, the second time we saw Romeo and Juliet. We spent time at the Tower of London. What else do we do?
We went out to Wapping.
Oh yeah.
We had a fun time finding it, but Wapping was the execution place for pirates in London.
Yeah.
But it's a short walk, they say, from the tower. I mean, that day we had something like 12, 15 miles on us.
Yeah.
We're walking around in London. It's a great city to walk around in. It's really easy. The night skyline in London is just stunning. The vistas of St. Paul's as you're coming down Fleet Street, it just fills the entire skyline. It's just absolutely beautiful.
And we do our best in London to recapture it as Roger would have known it pre-1666, because a lot of the landscape was destroyed, and St Paul's is a really good example, rebuilt by Remco's fire. We spent time in a 17th century pub, the old Cheshire Cheese, so if you ever get the chance, I encourage you to do that. So lots of kind of hands-on learning as much as possible.
That map that I sent you, was that the very first slide that we had?
Yeah.
You go back to that, it will give you an idea of what we covered on foot. in
Yeah,
London.
keep going back. We're doing well. It's a little bit
Keep
further.
going, keep going,
More.
There.
Yeah.
The yellow line that goes through this entire map, and around St. Paul's is there, Smithfield is up here, coming down and around over to the banqueting house, both sides of the Thames. The Globe is over in here. That's what we covered on foot.
Yeah, we deserved a pint at the old Cheshire Cheese at the end of that.
Well, when you think about it, from here, from the tower wasn't hit by the fire, but the fire swept all the way through, up through here, all the way over to here, destroying everything. The fire was in September of 1666, destroyed the heart of the city. The following June, as they're removing rubble from different places, fire broke out again from the embers of that fire. St. Paul's Cathedral is made out of sandstone. The old St. Paul's Cathedral was made out of sandstone. And it looked like it had survived. It had a lead roof originally. And they said the gargoyles along the top of the roof were spouting molten lead out over the city. But when they went into St. Paul's to inspect it, the fire had been so intense that when somebody touched one of the stones, it just crumbled to dust. That's the fire of London. 1666, they had plague, they had fire, and the British fleet at the mouth of the Thames was captured by the Dutch. Over here in New England, hearing that kind of news, and being biblically oriented and looking at the date, it's the end of the world.
Well, I think maybe we'll pause there and we'll have a little bit of time for questions. If people need to leave, we're very well aware that we've gone over our time limit, and I'm always mindful that people might have other things to do. So if you need to leave, we won't be offended. But we'll happily take some questions if
Sure.
that's okay. Sure, yeah, go ahead.
To the issue of the burning port.
Yes.
It's Vatican or whatever
Yeah.
it was. The Carib Indians were cannibals.
Okay.
And in their language, the word for human flesh is called
Long pork.
pig.
Yeah,
Long
long pork, long pig, yeah.
Yeah, because it's the fragrance flavor, I guess, I don't know.
Supposedly it tastes similar, yeah.
Yeah. And I was just up in a hospital today,
Okay.
in their animal laboratory, and they have live pigs that are used for experimentation and everything else, because they come closest to the human.
One of the few animals that sweat, the
So,
way humans do, yeah.
Yeah, good point. Other questions? Yeah.
Is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre the same as...
Can you just speak up for
I'm
me?
sorry. Is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre the same as St. Sepulchre's?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Sepulchre without Newgate. That's a full title.
That's,
right. Is it
yeah, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
Oh, in Jerusalem. Oh, that's.
Okay, that's
No, the one in London.
the one in London.
Is
I've
that
never
the
heard
same?
it called that, but I don't want to say either.
Yeah.
It's the catty corner to the Old Bailey.
Yes,
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay.
That's the one.
Yeah, in the 17th century now, the full title is Sepulchre without Newgate, but yeah, that must be the same one.
Yes,
That's the same area.
That's the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, good
Oh,
point.
so is Rodney Williams' body could have been dug up to take to Barnes Hospital for the students to...
Well, Smith's body, not Roger. Roger died over here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but it could be anywhere, right? Yeah, we don't know. And there's a whole bunch of other
But
people.
that's the thing. John Smith and Roger Williams went to the same church.
Okay.
Smith used to make his money telling tales at taverns in the area. He used to sit down at the tavern and tell stories about the New World. Well, Roger's mother ran a tavern right on Cow Lane.
So that tunnel that went from the church
Yeah,
across to the Old Bailey,
yeah.
the current,
No, to Newgate Prison.
okay. The tunnel
But the old, you're in the right neighborhood. The Old Bailey is diagonally across the
across
street.
the other side.
Yeah.
There's a tunnel from the church to the Old Bailey.
Yeah,
And the vicar in the church, when the judge is going to pronounce the death sentence, the vicar from the church has to go through the tunnel to the Old Bailey to stand behind the judge to say amen in the appropriate moments.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Just going back to Smith, actually, one of the things that's really interesting to me, there's been new research done on Pocahontas and how there was probably more than one, right? It means like playful young girl, and how Smith's story itself changes over time when he's trying to get different stuff done in London. So I'm always curious, like, what version of that story of that Pocahontas, it just means that Pocahontas translates as a nickname like young playful girl, like would Roger have heard, and how might that have inspired him to cross the ocean? I don't know. And then to think about his relationship with the indigenous peoples in the museum.
but the first Indians he would have seen was Cow Lane, would have been up here in Smithfield, because that's where the original Renaissance fairs were, at St. Bart's Fair. And they showed off all the new things that they had in the world. They showed off animals that they brought back from the world. They showed off some of the people that they brought back from the world. Right there, 100 yards from his house.
Yeah, and Pocahontas when she's Rebecca, she goes to court. She moves in really high circles. So I'm curious about what Roger might have seen as a young man working at Cook and having access to some of those places, and how that maybe shaped his interactions with indigenous peoples when he moved here. Yeah, I saw another hand. Can you just shout for me? I won't hear it.
When Roger Williams went back to acquire the charter, how did his reception relate to what Cook's daughter said he should anticipate? And were those at odds? And did that get in the way of him being successful?
While Cook's daughter didn't like him and thought he should hang, she would have been in the minority, because you're in the Commonwealth. Okay, and the established Church of England was not so heavily looked upon, so heavily favored during that time period. After the Restoration, you might have a different thing, a different feeling about the established church, but Roger's over there during the Commonwealth, with his cousin happening to be the Lord Protector. So it's a little bit, her sentiments as she expresses in the letter would not have been the most favorable, because she's also a supporter of the king, and she puts that into her letters as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When we think about how do people in England think about Roger at the time, I think it really does depend where you sit on the Civil War issue. I mean, thinking about the fact that they do burn the bloody tent, right? Like, as he basically gets on the ship to come back, like, they burn his book, and we have records of that happening. And so, there are certainly some people who fundamentally hate him, and England is going through its own individual religious mess. It's only really in the 1660s, after the restoration of the monarchy and Charles II taking the throne, that we see movements towards some religious freedom, but just...
And then when his brother takes it, it's all in upheaval again. Actually, almost the 1690s before England starts to stabilize. James II, who was Charles II's brother, was a Catholic. And they end up having the glorious revolution to get him out of there without chopping off his head.
But it means basically that when the king is restored in 1660, what does that mean for the colonies over here, like Massachusetts, Plymouth, and Connecticut, who are Puritan colonies one way or the other? And it's been the Puritans who killed Charles I, the new king's dad. Like, what do you do with that? So some really interesting literature on, how nervous they feel about the king coming back after they've just had Cromwell as a Puritan in power in the mid-17th century. So a lot of the way that we teach early American history now isn't case studies of New England. The big terminology is Atlantic world history, where we think about this bigger picture. And this is a really good example of what we would term the British Atlantic. That we can't understand what goes on in New England without really thinking about how it connects back to Old England, and also the trade in the Caribbean and what's going on in Africa. So this is a really good case in point, I think. But yeah, other questions?
You said Roger Williams should take the shorthand. That's something that's known of, or something he could be.
No, as with every person that does shorthand, if anyone remembers it, each person puts their own spin on it. If there are some standards, and it was something that was fairly new. It had been started in the 1580s. Roger's born about 1603. So there's this new way of taking down speeches. And it was a standardized way that had just started in England 20, 25 years before. And Roger learns it, apparently teaches himself shorthand. And as with anybody that took shorthand at any time, I know my mother was a secretary for a while, she took shorthand, every single person puts their own spin on things. So two people that learn the same shorthand in the same class, 5 years in the future, some of the stuff is going to be unintelligible.
And that's one of the interesting recent discoveries, that we had a book in the John Carter Brown Library that Roger had made notes in later on in life. It's one of the last things that we think he writes down, and it was all in shorthand. And basically, when he wrote it to, what, 7 years ago, we had no idea what this said, right? You know, like, it's been the big thing that early American historians have tried to crack. What was the shorthand that Roger scribbled in the margins of a book? It must be something really profound. Like, I always secretly hoped that it was going to be something like really dramatic, like, I never loved my wife, I should marry Jane Wayne, or like, just joking, separation of church and state, bad idea, but it wasn't. And so what happened was, Lucas Mason Brown, who was an undergraduate mathematician at Brown at the time, basically working with historians, cracked the code. So an undergraduate maths student cracked it. But so all of us historians were like, what is it going to say? I think that one of the last things that he writes, you know, he writes it in shorthand, paper scarce, and it doesn't really say anything.
There's a couple of sermons.
Yeah, it's a couple of sermons. Like he basically has a massive dig at John Eliot, who was a missionary in the Bay Colony, who you know, they don't agree about Christianizing Indians the same way. So it reaffirms what we know. But going back to the shorthand, it's clearly a skill that he keeps throughout his life and uses when it's necessary.
There's some of his letters that he actually writes some phrases in the letters in shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
He also uses Greek and Hebrew in his letters and expects everybody else to be able to read this.
Is there any estimates or guessing on where he might have encountered shorthand and said, gee, I want to learn that?
I mean, it would be sheer speculation. He might have picked up a book. Because they had been published in England, in London, books on shorthand, but it's pure speculation.
He's just that type of child, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's not surprising. Like, think about what we know about the rest of his life and what a talented linguist he was. I mean, I think it's not surprising, given what we know, that he would have wanted to learn that.
He's probably picked last on the ball team, so he went off by himself and got himself shorthand.